interviewing with. So I really have an understanding of what they are all about and what they are looking for and what they find challenging when communicating with military veterans. And then, of course, having the military background, I understand the challenge of transition and sometimes the challenge of breaking down what it was that we did into the military into a consumable format for that person that's interviewing you. And so first off, Liz gave you kind of a highlight of 5 things we say that you need to remember. Perhaps one I'll put up there as even above, put it at 0.5 above number 1, and that's really to just relax, everyone. You know, what I've seen over the years is a lot of people struggle with this, I think, more than they really need to, in that when I say relax, what you're about to embark on when you're interviewing with someone is having a conversation and storytelling. So take yourself back to when you were a kid and you used to tell stories, and that's really what you're doing in interviewing. And now you're just going to tell stories about what you did and put things in a form that people can relate to. And it's always storytelling that the most successful salespeople, the most successful companies are really good at being able to do, and that is to tell a compelling story. So you want to be able to tell the story of your life, and part of that story is being able to describe what you did in the military. So really that ought to be kind of easy because we've lived it, that's been who we are, and now we just need to draw out and tell stories in a very simplified way. So what I'm going to do is just touch on these 5 points that Liz highlighted and give you some of the perspectives that are really from the other side of the fence so that you understand that. And by the other side of the fence, I mean those recruiters and civilian hiring managers. And then flip it around and give you some pointers on how you can actually utilize that information to help you then paint the picture. So when we mention that really your MOS means nothing, not that it's not important to the skills that you've gained, but that nomenclature, that 11 Bravo, or that rating from the Navy of an HT, or your AFCS from the Air Force, they don't understand those things. And besides that, when you break down all of the services, there's almost 10,000 plus different skills classifications someone could have. So there's no way anyone's going to know what all those are anyway. So what you just need to realize that doesn't really mean anything to those that you're going to be talking to. So in addition to not really wanting to talk about that specifically in your interviews, even going to your resumes, because the resume is going to be your first presentation in most cases to a company, you don't want to have your specific MOS sitting on that resume because it's not going to necessarily mean something to a recruiter who doesn't have a military background. So I'd really encourage you to not have that specifically out there, and that be what you highlight in any communication, whether it be written or verbal in an interview. So when you say that you're an 11 Bravo, and for those non-Army folks out there, 11 Bravo, those are infantry, to you, and most in the military, an 11 Bravo infantryman, it paints an entire picture of everything that comes with being an infantryman. But for hiring managers and recruiters you're going to talk to, you just need to remember that it doesn't paint that picture to them. They don't have that perspective that they're going to all of a sudden understand everything. So when I say storytelling, what you want to think about doing is taking your MOS and using it as a starting point for you to go through an exercise of being able to tell your story and paint your picture that you see in your mind about what you did with your MOS, whether it be infantry or artillery or perhaps a wheeled vehicle mechanic or a petroleum specialist, a hull technician, whatever it might be, you want to be able to paint that picture of what you see in your mind and then convey it in just more general terms of what the maybe it's the leadership, the technical skills, etc., that you need to be able to get across to that hiring manager. Liz, if you'd go to the second point, the role within the military, as Liz mentioned, is a foreign language, to civilians. So it doesn't mean a lot. So, for instance, even platoon leader by name doesn't sound relevant to most in the civilian world. They don't understand, foreign language to them. They don't know what a platoon is. So it's going to be more effective to say something along the lines of, I was a leader of a group of approximately 40 personnel, and we provided security and combat operations while deployed to Iraq. And then later on, you can break it down further about all the different things maybe you did and had responsibility for as a platoon leader, but you put it in a very simple context for them to be able to understand. So, for instance, if you're a platoon sergeant or a squad leader or, maybe a first sergeant or, command sergeant major, they don't understand what that means. So you have to put it into context in a way that a context for the civilian world, a couple of points that almost everybody can grasp hold of are the size of the organization that you may have been either just a member of or a leader of. So a squad, anywhere from 8 to 12 people. A platoon, anywhere from, small platoons might be, 15 on up to 40. Companies, depending obviously the size, but you get the picture. You want to paint the picture as far as the number of personnel that are within that particular organization, and that will help frame it and give context to the individual, because what they're going to do when you give them that size, let's say of a 40-person unit that you led, what they're doing in their minds as the interviewer is they're thinking, that 40-person that person leading, that's like Joe over in the distribution center. He's leading 40 people in the distribution center as a warehouse manager. So they're going to draw the parallels, and that will help them then give some context to what it is that you've actually done in the military. Also helpful, so number of people. Also helpful is our budgets or different numbers that you might have been responsible for. So if you had any kind of budgetary responsibility, that can be helpful. If you were in maintenance types of roles, it would be helpful to understand and use term, rather than saying that you were a mechanic in a tank battalion, and now I'm going to show how long it's been since I've been out of the military. I don't specifically remember how many tanks are in a battalion, but let's say that there's 36 tanks in a battalion. Then you would really want to describe that as, I was a member. I was a maintenance mechanic that concentrated on mechanical and electrical issues on our fleet of tracked vehicles in support of a battalion of several hundred people. So you're giving it into context of what you provided in support, and that's how people are going to understand what it is that you've done in the military and relating it to the civilian world. So what that means is that it might take a little bit of studying on your part if you haven't worked in a civilian role before, so that you can put it into context that's meaningful to that person that you are talking with. So that means when you get an interview scheduled, you want to do a little bit of research to make sure you understand well, number one, the position that you're going to be interviewing for, and make sure that you understand what the responsibilities are within that role. And then secondly, you're going to want to also not just the role, but learn more about the organization. You know, what do they do? What's the overall organizational size? Because then what you're going to be able to do is match up your experiences that you've had and try to convey and show where there are parallels from what you've done in the military to what you are possibly going to be doing in this new organization. So that's what we talk about when we are mentioning how to convey that transition and speak in a language that they're going to understand. And if you keep things in that basic context of number of people and then basic budgetary or sort of numbers of pieces of equipment, or as I mentioned, you know, don't use the terms like a battalion of armored vehicles. You know, use it, call it a fleet of, and get specific, and, you know, 36 tracked vehicles. And that then will make more sense to the person that you are actually interviewing with in most cases. One point would be, to backtrack just a moment, would be as you're going into an interview or you're beginning to speak with people, it's always great to ask them a couple of questions at the beginning of an interview, and it's always appropriate. And you might even do research on LinkedIn and things like that once you learn who you're interviewing with, and see if they have any military background at all. And if you can learn that, that can sometimes give you a little bit of leeway on how you might talk about your military experience. So if you're someone from the Navy and you end up talking to someone that's in the Marine Corps or the Navy in an interview, you can probably get some more specific examples and talk a little bit more about specific terminology of Navy and the Marine Corps. But if you're talking to an Army guy and you were in the Navy, you might want to be careful because they don't necessarily inherently understand what you did in the Navy just because they were in the Army. So always try to find out as much information as possible before going into the interview as well, and that's going to help you out as you go talk with that particular company. Liz, is there anything on your end? You're not having specific military experience yourself, but having worked with now a bunch of military guys for a few years, anything that you'd add that you've seen here in working with us?
I'd just like to speak to what you said about the size. One of the most common questions I'll ask my coworkers who are all military is, oh, platoon, how many people is that? And as soon as you help paint the picture for me that, oh, that would be 40 people, I led 40 people, I was responsible for this, that gives me a much better idea of what you did. And those things help to be able to translate into, oh, if you led this many people, then you'd be qualified for this job because they also led this many people. So just painting that picture with specifics like size, or like you said with budget, with responsibilities, oh, I was at my computer doing this a lot of the time, or I helped with conflict resolution, or I helped with the organizational process. Just the specifics of what you did and painting that picture makes a huge difference for me as a civilian to understand what you did in the military.
All right, great stuff. And one more point on this, you know, Liz just mentioned conflict resolution, and another thing that a lot of you out there are going to have some tremendous experience with based on what you've been involved with in the world over the last decade is not just conflict resolution, but also an ability to work in very diverse environments. You know, we know that, by we, I mean those of us who've been in the military and those of us who've been deployed, we understand what it means that you've had to go to Iraq and Afghanistan and in many cases work with the local populace and what is really a tribal region of the world. And And that can be meaningful to convey an ability to work and adapt in diverse situations, to develop cohesiveness. You can really relate it to selling, to gaining trust, to breaking down barriers. So there's a lot of parallels that you can really bring out that are important to people that are out there in business, because business in most cases is really about solving problems and communication. And if you don't have those two things going on, then that's where businesses break down. And everybody who served in the military, you know that the problem solving and communication, it's no different. That's very important to doing well in the military as well, because you just don't function as a team or a unit very well if you don't have members of the unit doing that problem solving and you know, the conflict resolution and things like that. So a lot of very strong parallels that many of you have gained tremendous experience from. You know, I read emails sometimes from folks that have been in the infantry, and they kind of toss up their hands and say, there's nothing, the infantry means nothing, it doesn't, there's no translation. There's a ton of translation. You just have to be able to bring out your experiences, talk about leadership. Even the person who's just a squad member in the infantry has had instances of being placed into leadership. Just due to the nature of that, you've got that experience. You just have to go dig into your memory and pull out the experiences, and you can tell that story. Other things, the infantry, you know, you're very mission-oriented in the infantry, so that comes out and can be a true translation to the business world. So there's many things that have that direct application. It may not be hard skills, for instance, like a Java programmer or knowing HTML code, but oftentimes it's the intangibles that are more important in a business environment. And it's really only our challenge in conveying that where we stumble, and that's why the storytelling is so important. So Liz, let's go to the next slide, the third point of communicate your responsibilities. And real simply, you just want to place things in terms that virtually anyone can understand. Or if they don't immediately get it, you've at least given them something that isn't so technical that they can ask you further questions. So I've got an example here of a 91 Golf, a fire control repairer, and let's just say person's an E5, and you might be initially explaining, you know, what it is that you do. You look at this, if there happens to be anyone 91 Golf out there, you know that there's a ton more to go here that you could really dive into. But what we want to do is introduce, at least on a basic level, what it is that you do in a way that people can understand. And so it might sound something like, my role was to ensure that our laser and thermal imaging equipment was maintained, and I completed first-level repairs on the battlefield in Iraq. As a sergeant, I also had a team leader role and led a team of 5 maintenance personnel. The role developed strong mechanical and electronic maintenance skills that includes troubleshooting, schematic and wire diagram understanding, and hands-on capabilities. So what you've done there is you've broken down that 91 Golf into something that is at least able to, a person who doesn't know what that is, can at least begin to gain an understanding, and you've given them something that they can actually ask some deeper questions on. So for instance, if they don't understand what specifically thermal imaging equipment is, obviously they're going to have some understanding that it's, all right, I'm going to see something with it, but I might not understand the thermal part. But now you can at least give them information that they might dig a little deeper, which then allows you to go deeper and show your knowledge. But you don't have to think about getting everything spit out right at the beginning. All you want to be able to do is get the basics out so that you can compel them to dig deeper where it's relevant to them in their role. Because if you just go up and there's a term in sales, show up and throw up, meaning you show up at a business and all you do is tell them everything in the world about the product that you're selling. But that's not really effective because half of what you may have just said isn't relevant to the listener. So you want to give them just enough of a taste of what it is that you've done, and then let them ask some questions, and then you ask some questions back of them and get into a real dialogue so that you can have a conversation, a two-way conversation, and not just a one-way conversation of just being asked questions and giving answers back. So if you'd like at the end here, we're going to have a question and answer. Feel free in the question box to shoot your MOS, and don't just, since I'm an Army guy, and it's been a long time since I'm in, and there's a lot of MOSs that have changed. Don't just put like 91 Golf or something like that, but put your like it's shown here, 91 Golf Fire Control Repair, and we'll run through a few of those. If you have some questions about how you might present your specific position in a question and answer period, feel free to do that in the Q&A box there on the right of your screen. Liz, let's go to the fourth.
We're having just a couple of complaints about audio. So if you guys can hear us okay, can you go over to the question box and just let us know that it's still working? If not, we just need to take a second and troubleshoot the audio. Okay, just give me 1 second. All right, should be working now. Should be working okay now. Let me go to the next slide. All right, good to go, Mike.
Okay. So our fourth point is one that I always have mentioned when I've coached veterans as they're about to go into an interview and they're just transitioning and they're a little bit nervous about how to talk about that military experience, is to kind of pretend you're explaining your job to your non-military mother. I mean, when I don't know about everybody else, but my mom is about the furthest thing from a military person. And I always had to break things down into a very simplified way for her. And that really helped as I went out and sought jobs, because I already was doing that in trying to explain things to my mom so that she would understand, because she was interested in what I did, and so I had to break it down. So a helpful exercise for you to do is to take questions like we have here and actually write out some answers. So for example, with the what do you do every day, just write out what a typical day in your role looks like, and all of the different things that you face in a typical day, or different responsibilities that you have in a typical day. But make sure you write it out in a way that's very descriptive and one that almost anybody can understand, and that relates to what does that mean. Make sure that you're putting in there, so you do those things every day, what does that mean to the organization that you're a part of? As Liz mentioned earlier, how many people do you lead? What size budget do you manage? Those two things give a whole lot of a picture to someone who doesn't have military experience. And how do you help resolve conflict? What are those things you've done? What are the tactics you've used to resolve conflict? Because in business, you're going to have conflict, whether it's internal in your company, your own team, with customers, with vendors that you're going to eventually deal with. You're going to have conflict, and you're going to have to resolve issues in that. How do you plan and execute projects? If you're going for leadership positions or perhaps project management positions, being able to explain your thought processes and how you plan and execute projects. And in that, you want to include any tools that you may have used. So for instance, if you've been involved in project management and you've used maybe Microsoft Project or another software tool to help you manage projects, that would be good to have as a detail, because they're going to understand, they're going to be using the same tools in industry oftentimes. And if not that specific tool, they'll at least know that you've used tools in the past to help you with your projects and planning and operations. How do you deal with setback? How have you dealt with having things not go the way that you wanted? And understanding perhaps what's your greatest accomplishment, or what are those 2 or 3 things you're most proud of that you've been able to get done and accomplish in any position that you might have held. So running through and being able to provide answers to some of those can really help provide a framework for you as you get into conversations with companies. And Liz, is there anything, that again is someone not from the military? Are there any here that stand out to you as being real relevant as someone not from the military side?
Yeah, the second question is probably the question I ask the most. Just what does that mean? And I continue to ask it. If I'm talking to a veteran, I'm like, oh, what did you do in the military? And they say, that same example that we used before, 91 golf. I'm like, oh, what does that mean? And they're like, oh, fire control repair. And I'm like, what does that mean? And it just helps break down at every level to distill exactly what your responsibilities, what your skills were, and how that could apply to another job. And if you ask yourself that question when you're preparing to translate for a civilian recruiter, that'll help you help them understand too, and help you paint that picture in their mind so they have an accurate idea of what you did and how that could be translated to the civilian world. So I think that's the most important question to me, is just what does that mean, because it helps distill at every different level exactly what your day-to-day life in the military was like.
Yeah, that's a great point, Liz. It's almost a great internal question to ask. As you go through your exercise of breaking down what it is you've done, ask yourself that question, what does that mean that I just wrote down? So that you can, as Liz is conveying, you can be ready to answer those questions in an interview process. So that's a great point. Well, Liz, let's go to the fifth and final point, where we mentioned to distill your skills and apply them. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is that, going back to an earlier comment that I mentioned, read the job description of the position which you're applying for, and understand, or try to understand and grasp what it is that the company is looking for in that job description. Then in that, make 4 bullet points of the skills that they're seeking. Again, you're trying to synthesize and understand what it is that that company is really after and what they are looking for in an individual. And you're trying to figure out the need that they have. Now what you want to do, once you've taken that time to kind of figure out what it is that the company is looking for and what they need, is figure out those areas in your experience that fit those skills. And then go about explaining them. So if you're in that interview, you will have now gone through an exercise of understanding what the job description is, what the client or what the company is saying that they want this person to be able to do, what they want them to accomplish, some of the skills that they see as necessary. And then what you want to now do is take your experience and be able to show where it fits those skills and those responsibilities that the company is really laying out for you. And oftentimes you're going to have to think about a little bit, and it's going to take a little bit of work, but you're going to have to think of the stories you can tell from your experiences that are going to display that you do have those skills, that you do have what, or you have done what the company is trying to make happen in their job description. And by explaining them, again, that's just simply telling the story. So as you look at making this transition or being able to translate your skills from the military, again, keep it simple. Understand what it is that the client or the company is really working to achieve in hiring someone. And really remember, folks, that companies don't really like to hire people. So, and what I mean by that is they like to hire people because it means they're growing, but at the same time, they know that there's an expense in hiring someone, and you know, the main thing that businesses exist for is to make a profit. So they want to make sure that the person that they're adding and they're hiring is going to bring more to the bottom line than the expense of actually hiring them. So when they lay out their description and the skills that they want, they aren't doing that just out of the goodness of their heart or to help people. They're doing that more internally to make sure that they're aligned to know what they're trying to accomplish, so that as they talk to people and evaluate people, they can match that against there and see and make sure that someone lines up with those needs that they have. So you want to gain that understanding, take a deep breath, relax, and go into storytelling mode. And you'll be able to do that comfortably if you do some of the hard work up front of knowing what the company needs and then coming to know yourself and having gone through some of the preparation that we described here, and it will really then become a conversation where you're just doing storytelling. So Liz, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, we'll start the question and answer session in just a second here. We're going to look through some of these questions. While we do that, be sure to check out RecruitMilitary's Facebook page, our Twitter page, and our website at www.recruitmilitary.com. We have a schedule of events that we hold around the country. They're job fairs specifically for military veterans. You can find one in a city near you at events.recruitmilitary.com. On the right-hand side of the page, the same question box that we've been using throughout this webinar, just expand the toolbar by clicking the orange arrow at the top. Once it's opened, you should see that box for comments and questions, and you can submit your comments and questions there. Mike and I are the only ones who can see who's asking what questions, so don't be shy about asking. Let me just bring some of these questions up. Okay, Mike, let's start with what we were talking about earlier with the MOS, how you were breaking that down into how to effectively communicate that or paint that picture. We have a few requests about that. The most common one that we have is 11 Bravo Infantry.
Okay.
You want to give us a good idea of that one?
Yeah, so 11 Bravo Infantry, you know, just a few points to think about that MOS. And this is what I always think about, and for years have been conveyed to the clients, that the companies that we work with, is that in the infantry, you are primarily given tasks to accomplish. And so in that, it's oftentimes hardwired over time that someone in the infantry is going to be very mission-oriented, and they're going to come from an environment where it's expected that you take input, the requirements, figure out a plan, and achieve the mission. Now, you're going to have varying levels of responsibility in that. So if you're a young, you know, just squad member, your obviously influence on the plan and everything is going to be less than if you're the platoon sergeant who is 11 Bravo and has that greater responsibility to coordinate with the platoon leader. So it's going to be different depending on the level that you're at within your military career. But an 11 Bravo in a basic sense, to me, and the way I've had other folks successfully describe it, is that my role in the military is one that a very mission-oriented one, where we were at the point of the spear in very high pressure and demanding environments, and had the mission orientation and planning capabilities, troubleshooting capabilities to accomplish the mission. So it is a difficult one to be very specific on, but think of the different themes that are in that particular answer. You talk about mission-oriented, you talk about troubleshooting, you should also mention creativity. So you're an individual that inherently, through the missions that the infantry is given, are really given those skill sets that you would have developed as an 11 Bravo. So again, think about, just to recap, think of the themes of creativity, troubleshooting, mission orientation, and now I'm thinking of the fourth primary one that I had in there, Liz. I don't know if you happen to recall that, but those are the things that you want to concentrate on. And then with that, depending on where you are in an infantry unit, you would then add to that your leadership. So if you were a team leader, you would be, I also had leadership responsibility for 4 other individuals. Or if you're a squad leader, I led a team of 8 in our missions. Or if you're a platoon leader or a platoon sergeant, I led a team of 40. If you're, at the company level, the first sergeant or the company commander, you just give the perspective from the number of people that were in your unit and add that to those basic criteria that I mentioned almost every infantry person has.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. And I think that answers a lot of the individual questions that we've gotten on here too about how to translate from infantry if you want a job other than a security guard, which seems to a lot to be the most direct translation. But that's a way to find out what skills you actually utilize and then apply them to different sorts of positions. This is a great question. What sort of military skills can be translated into civilian skills for Army medics, which are 68 Whiskey?
In that case, a few things would depend on the type of position that you would be recruiting for, or you'd be interviewing for. But if it's in the medical arena, then you could obviously talk about the level of experience that you have and what you dealt with specifically in the medical arena. And I would encourage you to get descriptive. I'm personally not a medical person, so I'd have to ask you a bunch of questions to really help fully form an answer that would be medically relevant and sound good to a medical person. But even outside the medical realm, I think what you can also talk about here is that in that role, you've got a lot of relevance outside of the medical world too, in that you likely had to assess situations under very stressful conditions and make assessments and recommendations and have actions under very adverse conditions. And so with that, you can directly convey that to perhaps a job or a position that's perhaps in a very fast-paced environment. Perhaps it's production, or perhaps it's distribution, both very rapid, high-paced type environments. And you can relate directly your ability to work under stressful, demanding conditions and make assessments and to make decisions that had great effect on individuals in your role, in that medical role in the military. So there's, one of the things I challenge everybody on is that don't think that just because you were in one area of the military that there isn't crossover to other areas in the civilian world. You just want to find the parallels. And the parallels can oftentimes be an ability to operate in a similar environment. So, in that, if you were in that medical area, placed under very stressful and demanding conditions, which in the last decade it's likely that you were, then you can convey that to more stressful, high-paced type environments in the civilian world, regardless of whether they're also in the medical arena. So really search for those parallels and tie-ins, and that's going to really broaden the opportunities for you as well, so that you're not necessarily pigeonholing yourself in one area, but you're perhaps expanding your opportunities at the same time.
And I think also, I'm just going to add one quick thing to this. This question also says that he's served as a platoon sergeant in a squad in squad leader roles, and I think this can also be an area that you can expound on your leadership role. Like we were talking about earlier in the webinar, this is a good example to talk about the size, the number of people that you've led, how you've worked in a communicative environment with these people, and what kind of achievements you've had or what kind of setbacks you've overcome. Because those things are transferable to any type of job, whether it's something in the medical field that's exactly the same as your job in the military, or whether it's a new industry, a new position. Those things are what employers look for no matter what kind of job. So as long as you analyze the skills and responsibilities that you've utilized in your military position, you should be able to apply that to whatever civilian role you're looking for.
Yeah, that's a great point, Liz. And yeah, you always want to layer in that level of responsibility that you've had in leadership roles when you've been in those roles, and it's relevant to the job. If the job you're interviewing for is an individual contributor role, meaning it doesn't really have leadership related to it, then don't focus on leadership in your interview. Focus on your ability through skills to meet the needs of that particular job, which happens to be individual contributor at that time. So you want to make sure that what you're talking about relates directly to the job, and that goes to that fifth point that we talked about of making sure that you understand the job and apply your skills to it in a way that's meaningful and draws a direct connection.
Oh, this is a great question. There's actually several questions along this line. And these questions talk about, from a non-military perspective, the idea of infantry or security, even combat, deployment, that can be scary to civilians to think about. How do you bridge that gap with communicating the skills that you've acquired and utilized in those roles without instilling fear in civilian recruiters or intimidation?
Liz, as a non-military person, do you just want to give your perception real quick, and then I'll add a few comments?
Sure. I personally don't find that intimidating. I mostly just want to understand exactly what the role is that you've done. If you were deployed in Iraq, I want to know, what did you do on a day-to-day basis? Obviously, it's a scary environment, but that to me makes you more valuable, because I know that you are adaptable to situations that are not ideal. So if the working environment in our company, if something happened, I know you wouldn't just go to pieces because something wasn't working. I know you'd be able to take a step back, take a deep breath, assess the situation, and figure out how to solve that problem. And I think that's the most important thing you can do when communicating to any civilian recruiting manager or hiring manager, is just yourself in that situation, take a step back, and explain almost the smaller things within that larger deployment or within that larger security sense. Don't use just the one buzzword and expect them to understand all those things. Tell them what you did in Iraq. Don't just say, I was in Iraq for 9 months, for a year, working on security. Tell them what you did on a day-to-day basis so that it becomes more real to them. because most of that fear and intimidation is based off of the unknown, the fear of the unknown. So the more that you can do to paint that picture and familiarize them with what you actually did, it'll make them feel like they were there with you, and that'll change that intimidation to understanding.
Yeah, great points, Liz. And another thing that can really go a long way, and this may sound oversimplified, but it works, and that is, and it's sometimes hard for us military folks, especially me, and I'm a guilty party in this, is to smile. A smile will go a long way, and you want to, one of the things that's going on in an interview that you need to remember is it's also about getting to like you. And the way, and you think about it, how do you get people to like you? It's by being pleasant, being warm, by being welcoming. And if we keep our military face on when we're walking into an interview, and by my military face I mean stern, rigid, I'm tough, you're already putting up a wall. So the moment you walk into a room, and then throughout the interview, you want to be smiling. And if you're doing a phone interview, literally, I had to personally do this, guys. I've got Eastern European heritage, so I'm very stoic, and Liz can probably vouch for this. Smiling isn't something that it's just not a big part of who I am. Not that I'm unhappy or angry or anything. But when I was interviewing for jobs, I put a mirror in front of me, and it sounds ridiculous, but it helped me because I smiled, saw the smile in the mirror, and that comes across the phone on a phone interview. And in face-to-face, a smile immediately conveys to the other person that you're comfortable, that you aren't intimidated yourself, and that you are at least outwardly open and non-intimidating or less intimidating. So smile. I can't emphasize that enough. And then, as Liz mentioned, more than anything, what you may be experiencing is that people fear the unknown. And unfortunately, those of us who've served, we bear the heavier burden of having had to have served in rough places for the country. And we don't, so a lot of the populace can't even understand a lot of the stuff that we've seen and experienced. And you're never going to be able to effectively convey all of that to them. So if you, again, this goes back to the storytelling. Think of the way to tell the story without using the words like deploy or, combat, or those words that may, kind of make someone nervous, especially in your first couple of answers. As you start engaging with someone, and you get a lot of good back and forth, and yes, you've been smiling back and forth, you're gaining some rapport with them, you might be able to intersperse some of those words later in the conversation, but don't start with those. Warm them up a little bit, kind of, to use the military terminology, and me being an artillery guy, prep the battlefield a little bit. Soften them up a little bit, and you soften them up by smiling, a warm greeting, and telling stories that are very, as general as you can to kind of warm them up. And then when they want to go deeper, you can go deeper. But that's how you can really be effective in your communication and help break away some of that fear of the unknown, because that's primarily what it really is when you get down to it. So again, remember that word, smile. And if you're doing a phone interview and you haven't done it yet, or you haven't heard the advice of put a mirror in front of you, go try that the next time you have a phone interview, and even feel let yourself feel how you feel in that interview compared to not having that mirror in front of you. And I bet you'll even feel like you did better in the interview because you were smiling.
I haven't personally done the mirror thing, but I have done making sure to smile on a phone interview, and it feels awkward at first, but it just changes the whole atmosphere. You know, you sit up straighter, it comes across in your voice. It really makes a huge difference. So that's great advice. We are running out of time here, so we're just going to hit one or two more questions. This should be a quick answer one. And the question is, if you have a broad military background, should you tailor your resume to the specific job you are applying for and not put everything you did on your resume? And the simple answer to that is yes. That goes back to our fifth point, which was distill the skills you used and then apply them to the job that you want. If you know exactly what one job you're applying for, you should have gone through that job posting, found out what characteristics, what qualities, what experience they're looking for, and you should be able to tailor your resume so that you are their perfect candidate based off of your experience. So short answer, yes, always tailor your resume. Let me get one. Oh, and one last question. This is a good question. And Mike, I'll throw this one back to you. This question is, what do you mean by things you have overcome?
Things that you have overcome might be personal challenges that you had. You know, it's okay to tell some personal stories. You know, for instance, if maybe your father passed away when you were young, and you were challenged to overcome that, and you had to go to work, to help support things. It doesn't always have to be specifically your work experience, but as it relates to work experience, perhaps that you were in a leadership role and your team or your unit didn't perform optimally in a particular situation, and so you had to do some troubleshooting and maybe extra training to bring that particular unit that you were a part of up to standard, or just into a better place than they were. So it can be very broad in what you are talking about, or it could it could even be just physical setbacks maybe that you had. Perhaps you got injured and had to overcome an injury. It can really vary on that. It's really more about what the premise behind that question is figuring out, can you deal with adversity, and how have you done it in the past? Because there's just a thought process out there that if you've dealt with adversity in the past and you've done it effectively and come out okay on the other end, that being able to do that and having had the experience doing that is really more important than fully understanding, exactly what it is that you overcame. So just think through, personally, things that maybe have happened to you in life, and it doesn't always have to be specifically job-related when we talk about that.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And that's going to wrap up the question and answer for today. Thank you all for joining us for how to translate your military skills into civilian language. We will be hosting more of these webinars in the future, so let us know what you think, what you want to hear more about, and whether this was helpful to you. We'll be uploading the PowerPoint and the audio onto YouTube in the next day or two, so keep an eye out for that link. It should be on our Facebook page and on our LinkedIn page as soon as it's available. In the meantime, best of luck with your job search, and be sure to check out our other job-seeking resources at RecruitMilitary.com. You can also connect with Mike and me personally on LinkedIn and with RecruitMilitary on Facebook and on our website. Thanks again. Have a great day.